Good morning and welcome to Rising. Have we got a great show for you today because the Irishman is back. Lindsay is on a secret mission, I believe, for her travel show all next week. So you'll be in the chair for a couple days.
Always a delight, Robby. Good to see you. How are you doing?
I am doing quite well. This is a busy week processing the kind of post-election commentary. We've got a little bit of that coming today, but so I'm tired, and I'm sure you are as well, but we endure.
We do, and we like election weeks as well. It gives us plenty to talk about.
It's our Super Bowl.
That always helps, for sure.
All right, well, I guess I'm going to get to my radar.
I believe so. What is on your radar, Robby?
Let's do it. There was a major development yesterday regarding the growing feud on the political right over Tucker Carlson's interview with Nick Fuentes. Now, Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation, who initially had defended Carlson and said that Heritage as an organization would never cancel him, has now apologized at great length to his entire staff. Roberts appeared at an all-staff meeting and offered an apology. That was yesterday. He then went on to take questions for 2 hours from staff members, some of whom thanked him and said that they still back him, while others trashed him and said he should resign. That meeting was recorded, and it was shared with the Washington Free Beacon, a conservative news outlet. Here was Roberts' apology.
I made a mistake, and I let you down. And I let down this institution. And I am sorry for that. Period. Full stop. And what I want to do, without making excuses for anything, is explain to you the purpose of and the process by which we posted the video. You can ask whatever question you want. Every question is in bounds.
Over the course of the next 2 hours, Roberts apologized again and again and then faced comments, many of which were hostile. Here was one.
I stand here today with no ability to say I have confidence in your leadership for this institution moving forward. And I also know that that sentiment is shared by others in this room who, for reasons that I think are perfectly reasonable, especially given what we've seen this last week, are afraid to say that exact same thing openly and directly. But as you yourself have said, now is the time for courage. And Dr. Roberts, over the last week, you have shown a stunning lack of both courage and judgment.
I'll be honest, at this point, I really can't tell whether Roberts is going to keep his job, though it's clear he would like to. If he does keep his job, it will be because he did make clearer that whatever his personal affection for and friendship with Tucker Carlson, the Heritage Foundation cannot and will not be a partner to the platforming of anti-Semitic and racist views. That clarification may or may not satisfy the more establishment elements of the conservative movement. It's certain to turn off the younger, more radical right, which maybe condemns Fuentes' anti-Semitism and racism, but does think that the conservative movement has missed the mark on sticking to Trump's America First foreign policy. Now, I said it all this week, but I'll say it once again. The cardinal mistake that conservatives are making here, in my view, is failing to advance a policy of separating American interests from the interests of this Israeli government. Not Israel writ large, but this Israeli government. To be as clear as possible, younger, male, Catholic conservatives do not think the U.S. should continue to provide military assistance to Israel. Simply have a different foreign policy view than older, more Protestant-leaning or Jewish conservative intellectuals. Fuentes is gaining ground with some of them, precisely because Israel has been such a big news topic over the past 2 years after that country suffered an horrific terrorist attack and then retaliated with a bombing campaign that has devastated Gaza. I speak of the Israel media cycle with first-hand knowledge. Trust me, after 2 years of this, I have no real desire to further discuss, debate, and scrutinize a conflict half a world away in which I do not believe that America should be involved whatsoever. And I have very little desire for people I otherwise agree with and consider my ideological friends and allies to be at each other's throats over this. As I observed earlier this week on X, you can't win. It's extremely frustrating attempting to hold any sort of nuanced or middle ground opinion with respect to this burgeoning conservative civil war, because on one side, so many people that I like and generally agree with seem to casually shrug off any suggestion that their unwavering support for Israel's wars is creating a PR problem for those who are trying to keep Fuentes at bay. Now, on the other side, I am frequently called an Israel shill or worse, a genocide supporter, for criticizing the racist, anti-Semitic, and pro-Hitler garbage that is spouted by Fuentes and others. You can't win. So what I propose is for the former camp to give some ground and be far more permissive of criticism of Israel and its government and the U.S.'s support for it, and then for the latter camp to be far more willing to call out the racism, the anti-Semitism, the pro-Hitlerism that's in their midst. If we can't do that, then we will not have a conservative movement much longer.
Strong stuff, Robby. First of all, before we get into discussing the specifics of this in relation to Israel and the conservative movement, I was impressed by that woman in the video clip we played, simply because I like people saying stuff like that to bosses, or saying stuff like that which they obviously do genuinely believe in a situation that is difficult. She's standing up before the leader of her think tank, her institution, and saying she has no confidence in him. I admire people who do that, so that's one thing. On the more substantive point of this, look, I have been very critical here and elsewhere of Israel's conduct of its war in Gaza. I do that I would believe from a sort of human rights, fairness, compassion perspective. I don't like to see a civilian population being slaughtered. I don't want the allyship of people who are anti-Israel because they don't like Jews. I think that's as disgusting a prejudice as any other kind of prejudice, and it completely appalls me. As far as heritage is concerned, the thing that I think that really stuck in a lot of people's craw was Kevin Roberts talking about a venomous coalition against Tucker
in the initial
thing,
yes,
against Tucker Carlson. Whenever, I mean, I think Nick Fuentes is an appalling person, and I think that there are very good reasons to be opposed to the mainstreaming of him, and those people who don't want Fuentes mainstreamed shouldn't be sort of besmirched in that way.
Yeah. As I've said, I occupy a kind of in the middle, frankly, position here that satisfies absolutely no one, because, I mean, I agree, Fuentes should not be mainstreamed. I don't think deplatforming or that kind of approach really works anymore because of just anybody's ability to become a high-profile commentator on social media, kind of their own compelling nature, and he is a compelling speaker, unfortunately, and he is funny and he is resonating with young people, so you can't just pretend he doesn't exist. But if you're going to engage him, you have to engage him. You can say, well, and thank you, and I agree with you on this aspect of your foreign policy, but also you said that Hitler was good. He said Stalin was good in the interview with Tucker, and they never circled back to that, even though Tucker said they should. So I think criticism of how he was engaged is and there should have been much stronger. There wasn't criticism at all. There was an agreement that it was fine to do that. Kevin Roberts did endure a real flogging in that 2 hours. I mean, there were some supportive comments. There were others like that. I don't know. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it was kind of crazy. So he constructs what happened as that his chief of staff wrote the script for that video. His chief of staff is clearly someone more ideologically in sync with what Tucker is doing, and that person has been fired, and he says he's not online enough to understand why those were dog whistles, and he's very sorry for it, and he apologized over and over again. I don't know how I would incline to think if I would be an employee of his, whether I would accept that, but that's his explanation.
I don't love leaders blaming the people beneath them for their own mistakes, I guess, is my bottom line on that one. Whether he survives or not is not something that exercises me a lot. Just briefly on Fuentes, you said something to the effect of, you can't ignore him, you can't pretend he doesn't exist. I mean, you can pretend he doesn't exist. He can certainly build his own audience through his own social media platforms and others, but I'm not entirely sure that there's any need to really be discussing someone like that in the public square.
Yeah, I think he's already achieved escape velocity. I think, we can't convince the New York Times not to write profiles of him where they airbrush him into looking attractive. I mean, they already have done that. He is going to be portrayed as a breakout star on the right especially because of the attention he's gotten in the last couple of weeks, really. And I'm not sure, I won't say I know exactly how he should be engaged or I have exactly the right strategy and everybody should listen to me, but I think the worst thing would just be putting him on your show and just say,
Right.
softball like, oh, well, we can hang out, we're cool, you're cool, without saying, but Hitler.
Right,
I want to
exactly.
hear, but Hitler.
Right.
A few more times from Tucker and Dave Smith and other people who have put him on.
And been far too soft, I think,
Yeah.
in both our opinions.
Next up, the Supreme Court heard arguments yesterday in President Trump's tariffs case. Fascinating. Some of the justices seemed very skeptical of the legal argument or the constitutional argument for doing that. Stay with us, we'll discuss. The Supreme Court is weighing on a decision that could have big ramifications for President Trump's economic agenda and maybe other issues. On Wednesday, the court spent hours listening to arguments on the legality of Trump's tariffs.
The Trump administration invoked the sweeping tariffs earlier this year, justifying them by declaring a national emergency. But many justices on the Supreme Court expressed skepticism that the president has the authority to do that. The Hill writes, quote, while Liberal justices took the lead in picking apart the Trump administration's arguments, Conservative justices Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts also scrutinised the White House's arguments that the president has authority to impose the levies based on emergency powers. The court, of course, currently has a 6-3 Conservative majority, with 3 of those Conservative justices having been appointed by President Trump during his first term.
One of the more notable moments during Wednesday's arguments came when Justice Neil Gorsuch asked about the possibility of climate change being used as a justification for the tariffs. Here was the exchange between Gorsuch and Trump's Solicitor General, John Sauer.
Could the president impose a 50% tariff on gas-powered cars and auto parts to deal with the unusual and extraordinary threat from abroad of climate change?
It's very likely that could be done. Very likely.
I think that has to be the logic of your view.
Yeah, in other words, obviously this administration would say that's a hoax, it's not a real crisis, but...
I'm sure you would.
Yes, but that would be a question for Congress under our interpretation, not for the courts.
Well, that moment was widely criticized by those who opposed the tariffs online, many raising concerns about what it would mean if future presidents could declare an emergency in the same way. Writer Pedro Gonzalez says, this is so funny, man. The Trump administration wants to open the door for a Democratic administration to be able to declare a national emergency on climate change just because Trump won't accept the tariffs have been a disaster. Economic historian Philip Magnus writes, Trump's admin argument implies that Congress could cede its entire responsibility in foreign policy to the president. Gorsuch is not buying the admin's position at all.
It could be several months before there's any sort of ruling from the court on this case. But the court has been asked to expedite their decision, so it is possible that we get one sooner rather than later.
Yes, so I followed this very closely. I am not a fan of the tariffs. I'm not a fan of emergency power stuff. I think Gorsuch asked just the question to elicit, I think he wanted that response. He wanted it for the record. The Trump administration is arguing for an executive power that could be used by Democrats for climate emergency or really any other progressive policy. I think, based on what I heard, that the administration is going to lose this one, which again goes to show how it is more complicated than just 6-3. Conservatives have the court. The people on the court are independent thinking and, frankly, more deferential to ideologically conservative principles that predate Trump. It seemed pretty clear that you had Amy Coney Barrett against this, and I think Gorsuch plus the liberals will make maybe Roberts, maybe Kavanaugh, I don't know, will make this dead.
Yeah, it certainly seems that there was a lot of skepticism, including from the Conservative majority. And there are really interesting issues within this that go broader than the tariffs themselves. One is one of the Liberal justices was saying, well, look, tariffs are a tax, aren't they? They clearly are. And the government's position is, well, no, they're not really. They're something different from a tax. But they are effectively a tax. I mean, they're a way of getting revenue for the government and getting it off private individuals. And so if you concede the point that the president can just impose this, you're essentially taking the power of taxation away from Congress and handing it to your president.
And proposals to tax must according to the Constitution, originate in the House of Representatives.
Right.
It's written in the Constitution.
Right.
So that you could not have an executive. I mean, this was, if you go back to our founding documents and our founding circumstances, one of the main complaints of the colonists as they rebelled from Britain and started their own country was having taxation from the authorities without the ability of, without having an elected and a democratic body that was elected by the people, that was accountable to the people, weighing in on that issue. That was one of their cardinal problems and motivations for the rebellion, which is why it was structured so that the House, the most democratic aspect of our government, must originate taxation schemes.
Right.
So this is just so contrary to that.
Exactly, because here you have a president essentially delving in and
Right.
taking those powers for himself. The other point that I think is very particular to Trump in a way is this propensity he has to believe that you can just declare an emergency in various ways and do whatever you like. And that is what he's claiming in this case. But of course, he's claiming that in various other elements of policy as well. I mean, in immigration, the Alien Enemies Act, for example, is just, well, I've decided that we're being invaded by Venezuela against really all available evidence, and therefore I'm just going to use emergency powers. There was the other thing, and I think this was in the Khalil case, where the State Department used that little part of the law that says you can remove anyone who is adverse to American foreign policy interests, a condition or a clause that was really intended to be for like major political figures who are somehow setting up camp in the United States and not random individuals who disagree with a particular administration's foreign policy. So that propensity to just lean on emergency powers and define them in this enormously expansive way, I think is very dangerous.
The scope, certainly, the scope of what's getting considered an emergency and by the Trump administration, I would never claim that Trump is the first person to do this. Every president, in my view, has kicked open the door to further executive powers. I was very against President Biden issuing a mandate for 80 million workers to get vaccinated under basically workplace safety policies, OSHA. Actually, we're going to talk about vaccine mandates, I think, coming up next on the show. So I was very against that, very against all the ways Obama and, of course, Bush massively expanded in the face of maybe you would even say an actual emergency in the face of a terrorist attack on the country and our foreign policy. But even in that case, we've come to really regret, Republicans have come to regret powers bestowed on the executive in response to that emergency. Right. Now everything's an emergency. What do you think, Trump people, what do you think the next Democrat is going to do when he's in office? But I guess their view is just, well, the Democrats are going to do it anyway, so we might as well. But we're making it a lot easier for them to do it when you're coming up with justifications to do overreaching policy and then you're defending them in court. Yep. Democrats don't have to defend them in court if they've already been defended by you.
Right, exactly. And don't basically defend a principle that your enemies can then use against you whenever they get into power.
The weapons of the oppressors is my strategy if I was ever in office. But Republicans don't follow it.
Maybe it's time for the 2028 Soave run.
Can you imagine that?
I don't know that you win, but
I think I would be canceled on day one.
Coming up, the Department of Defense is establishing a pair of task forces to review its COVID vaccine mandate. Don't go anywhere, we'll be back with that.
The Department of Defense announced Wednesday that they were establishing 2 task forces to review its COVID-19 vaccine mandate.
In October, the Pentagon had ordered, quote, white glove or VIP treatment for those who left the military over the COVID vaccine but were interested in returning.
And then on Wednesday, the Department of Defense's Undersecretary Anthony Tata spoke about the new initiative. Let's watch.
And the big announcement today is the establishment of 2 task forces that will review the policy development and implementation of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. These task forces will include members of the affected community, and they will be focused on making sure that this never ever happens again to our servicemen and women in uniform, their families, or department civilians.
CNN reported in October that as of May, only 13 of the 8,000 service members who were removed had returned under the Pentagon's reinstatement policy. In 2021, the Pentagon required the COVID vaccine for the troops, especially those abroad. Congress then overturned the policy in 2023.
Meanwhile, Pfizer's COVID vaccine sales have dived 25% after the CDC stopped recommending the shot universally, instead leaving the decision as to whether to get it up to patients. Advisors chosen by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, made those new guidelines.
Yes, well, I am glad for this policy of bringing back the people who resigned over the vaccine mandate. Look, I don't necessarily object to the government having some right with respect to its own employees. I mean, especially people who want to serve in a service capacity do give up certain rights they are entitled to do that for unit cohesion and unity if there's a good justification for it. But as it turned out, the COVID vaccine is mostly a personal health decision, and I don't support. There isn't enough of a public health justification, in my view, to say you should have to get it to be part of government service or part of military service or anything else, because it doesn't stop anyone else from getting it. It's about your individual health profile, and if you don't want to get it, it's none of my problem.
So, as you know, you and I have a philosophical difference on the mandate question, quite aside from the efficacy or otherwise of the COVID version. I think that as a broad principle, vaccine mandates are perfectly fine. I mean, when children go to public schools, we expect them to be vaccinated for polio and various other things, and if you're not vaccinated for those, you can't come. And I don't think that principle is noticeably different when it comes to something like the armed forces. Now, where there's a separate issue is whether the mandate in this instance was based upon exaggerated or fallacious claims or not. That seems to me a different question. But I mean, I am not opposed to vaccine mandates.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm not opposed in this circumstance either. For schools, for government employment, my opposition to the Biden vaccine mandate was, well, I don't think the president should have the power to declare this without. It should have been Congress got to pass a law. It was clearly, it was not, to my mind, the Supreme Court agreed with me, in keeping with OSHA's authority. And also, it applied to private workers, which I just oppose. Again, in this case, I don't oppose mandate necessarily in principle, but I do not think it was worth requiring in this case, because the public health benefit was not significant enough. It was missold to the public on that basis, which has now inspired a backlash against vaccines everywhere in our country, where people want to undo vaccine mandates for vaccines that really do prevent spread of very dangerous diseases for children. There is a backlash against that because they've been conflated with the COVID vaccine not having the public health benefit. So I think that's a cautionary tale.
No, it is. I mean, there has been obvious or intentional misinformation as well. But yes, that plays a part, and there have been really detrimental public health impacts on that. Next on Rising, I will be diving into Zoran Mamdani's historic win in the New York City mayor's race, converting Robby to democratic socialism.
Can't wait for that.
Stick around for that.
Welcome back to Rising. Niall, what's in your notes today?
I'm glad you asked, Robby. Today, I want to pay tribute of a kind to Zoran Mamdani, to his success in winning election as mayor of New York City, to the thousands of New Yorkers who volunteered for him, and the more than 1 million people who voted for him. They all beat the odds in their own way. It's worth reminding ourselves just how improbable Mamdani's rise appeared 1 year ago. Back then, he was a virtual unknown, a young democratic socialist state assemblyman. When his campaign began, he was at 1% in the polls. That was among Democrats. And in the end, he beat Andrew Cuomo twice. Cuomo, a former governor, the son of a former governor, the favourite of the Democratic Party's centrist Clintonite faction, and the favourite of some of New York's most powerful business interests. Mamdani first beat him in the primary in June, and he beat him again on Tuesday. And that's good, because in beating Cuomo, he beat back those powerful interests and beat back the well-funded politics of fear. Look at this chart from Open Secrets, an organisation that traces money in politics. That orange line you see there shows the money given to outside groups either to help Cuomo or to stop Mamdani. The green line, way, way below it, is the money given to help Mamdani or to stop Cuomo. The difference there speaks for itself. Mamdani beat back some disgraceful media coverage too, coverage that was often hysterical, fear-mongering, or blatantly bigoted against a Uganda-born Muslim. Now, believe me, I know there are many, many members of our audience who don't share Zoran Mamdani's democratic socialist beliefs. But I'd like to think that even some of those who disagree with his ideology might at least have some quiet admiration for his outsider victory. The people beat the power brokers in New York on Tuesday, and that's always a good thing. Here's the man himself underlining that point in his victory speech in Brooklyn.
Thank you to those so often forgotten by the politics of our city who made this movement their own. I speak of Yemeni bodega owners and Mexican abuelas, Senegalese taxi drivers and Uzbek nurses, Trinidadian line cooks and Ethiopian aunties. Yes, aunties. To every New Yorker in Kensington and Midwood and Hunts Point, know this. This city is your city, and this democracy is yours too.
This democracy is yours too. That's a message we don't hear enough in our politics, and that's another thing about Mamdani's win. It's in part a rebuke to the democratic establishment as well, a rebuke to a party leadership that he cast as too weak, too fearful, and too corporatist, a rebuke to policy positions that are too often driven by the desires of big donors or the fear of offending them. Mamdani's morality, he said elsewhere in his speech, would be guided by a, quote, bold vision, rather than a, quote, list of excuses for what we are too timid to attack. I want to say a couple of words about his vision. It's been cast as scary or subversive by his opponents in politics and in the media. Here, for example, is the New York Post front page on the day after his election. But what is the programme that the Post and Rupert Murdoch are portraying as Soviet-style communism? A promise of free childcare for little kids aged 5 and under, a promise that city buses will be free, a promise to open one city-run grocery store in each of New York's 5 boroughs. And how will it all be paid for, the critics cry? Mamdani has already given his answer many times. It's by nudging up the city's corporate tax rate so it's on a par with neighbouring New Jersey, and by adding just 2% to the income tax rate of people earning $1 million or more. Only in America, where Democrats as well as Republicans often sing from the billionaire's song sheet, would offering free childcare for all, or asking the wealthy to pay 2% more tax, be seen as dangerously radical. But that's the point about Mamdani's candidacy. It was unafraid, and courage, just like cowardice, is contagious. That's why billionaires try to nip it in the bud. And it's why Zoran's victory speech has gone viral too. Because it felt good to see someone show some guts for once, to stand up to Trump and to stand up for this nation's greatest city, a city that I, like many immigrants, first called home here in America. And to do it all like this.
New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and as of tonight, led by an immigrant.
Or to do it like this.
This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
Mamdani's win was so emotional for so many because it offered hope. We haven't had a lot of that recently. We need more of it. And on Tuesday, we felt it stir one more time. Turn the volume up, indeed.
Well, I don't want to yuck your yum, Niall, and I'm happy for you. And look, I'll give him a chance, just like I would anyone else. He is clearly a talented political figure. He is, and he kicked the Democratic establishment in the face, and they deserved it. The establishment put up no reasonable alternative to Mamdani. Right. So this is not, I don't have, my hair is not on fire. I'm not screaming that it's come to this. I think some of his idealism will run into will face practical difficulties in cajoling so many elements of this city into working with him, and it is probably likely his governance will not be any further left than Bill de Blasio's was. Is that Soviet-style communism? Probably not. I won't use that rhetorical excess. I did, it's not that I'm so against him, but I do, I'm watching the victory fanfare there, and AOC's there, and she's on her high horse, and Lena Khan is going to be on the transition team, whom I despise, and then Hassan Piker is there talking about how the Soviet Union should have won, and I'm like, okay, well, now we're getting into some real radicalism, and I just don't like to see Hassan Piker happy about anything, but whatever, it's not my night, it's yours. So.
Well, the Hassan Piker Soviet Union thing, I wouldn't share that view. But I do think, AOC, naturally enough, celebrating a campaign that she herself supported. There was that big rally about a week or so shortly before early voting began, with AOC and Bernie Sanders and Mamdani. And I just think that the fact that there was so much money shoveled in against him, so much I regard sort of ludicrous media coverage. It's 3 million people are about to flee New York the moment he wins, and all that rubbish. So the fact that he was able to do that, and the fact, honestly, that Andrew Cuomo ran at times a very ugly campaign, I thought, especially in the final days of that campaign, sort of giving a nod and a wink to some of the awful stuff that was said in relation to sort of 9/11, and somehow linking Mamdani to that purely on the basis of his faith.
Well, in addition to that, I was offended by the way Cuomo and his backers treated Curtis Sliwa, frankly, because you're not entitled. You can make a pitch to those voters. They didn't really do that. It was more like, no, you don't want Mamdani, so you're obligated to vote for me rather than Curtis Sliwa. A vote for Sliwa is a vote for Mamdani. I just reject that kind of logic entirely. Make a pitch for his voters then. Didn't do that. It was more an entitlement that, well, no, I'm the legitimate opposition. Well, you're not. You lost your party's primary, dude. That's the Republican candidate. Exactly. Why shouldn't you get out and support him? Why does he have to get out to support you? It doesn't make any sense. And then you could, if you put their votes together, Mamdani, he got cleared 50%. He just barely, but he did. So it's stupid.
Who knew that we could find common ground on Zoran Mamdani? I find the pressure for Sliwa to get out ridiculous. He's the Republican Party nominee. Why did he get out? I mean,
Cuomo forced Eric Adams from the race too. It's like, what, everybody has to bow and scrape to you, my friend? I don't think so.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, ridiculous indeed. All right, Trump ordering the Pentagon to draw up plans of action after allegations of Christian persecution in Nigeria. Stay with us.
A new report from the New York Times alleges that the US military has drawn up plans to deploy troops to Nigeria. That's in order to quell violence against Christians.
This comes after President Trump's post to Truth Social last Friday called out the alleged persecution of Christians in the West African nation, and he doubled down in a video on social media this week.
Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands and thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I am hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern. That's a legal definition. When the Christians or any such group is slaughtered, like is happening in Nigeria, 3,100 versus 4,476 worldwide. What horrible numbers. The United States cannot stand by while such atrocities are happening in Nigeria and numerous other countries. It's not only Nigeria, it's all over. We stand ready, willing, and able to save our great Christian population around the world.
Over the weekend, Trump threatened to mobilize American troops as well as cut off aid and assistance to Nigeria. He posted on Truth Social, if the Nigerian government continues to allow the killings of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I'm hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be vast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians, warning the Nigerian government better move fast. And some members of Congress seem to be backing him up.
That's right. Texas Senator Ted Cruz introduced a bill, that was back in September, that would sanction Nigerian officials who were deemed complicit in the violence. And Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville said this week that he would support President Trump should he send troops to Nigeria. But according to that New York Times report, putting boots on the ground may not do much to help. The Times reports that the violence and land disputes in Nigeria have killed thousands of Muslims and Christians alike, and, quote, militant groups like Boko Haram and the Islamic State West Africa province have targeted Christians in Nigeria, along with many Muslims accused of not being devout enough. Any major military operation by the United States would be likely to fail, current and former military officials said.
Well, I don't like the idea of boots on the ground anywhere, really, and I don't like them without, again, Congress being the appropriate body to declare war on these radical groups in Nigeria. Now, that said, there has been a use of authorization for military force against ISIS and radical Islamic terrorist groups like Boko Haram that are active there. Boots on the ground would be a step further than we should certainly go. If there is, frankly, bombings or logistical support we can provide to target Islamic radicals that are also America's enemies, that is fine by me. It's not about protecting just Christians, and I'm glad that Trump did say "and other groups" in his remark, because I've seen videos of the Boko Haram leaders calling for deaths of everyone who gets in their way. It's really, I mean, these are demonic cults of just
religious fanaticism,
homicidal
really.
maniacs. This is just ISIS is just a death cult at the end of the day. Sanctioning them, if there's a plan to do that and why that would help, fine. I'm skeptical of sanctions. I don't really want to send aid to other countries anyway, so if they want to cancel that, I'm also fine by that. What do you think?
Well, I think that any form of religious violence is wrong, and I think it's wrong when it targets Christians, and I think it's wrong when it targets, insufficiently devout Muslims or anything. I am very... I mean, it seems almost superfluous to say, I'm very opposed to religious fanaticism.
Right.
Now, I think that Trump, although he did add the word "and other groups" or whatever, at other times he does seem to have stressed very much his concerns with Christians when he was talking about the worldwide picture. He was also talking about protecting Christians. I think people of all faiths should be protected, and there is genuine dispute about whether the violence in Nigeria is targeting Christians more so than just anybody who doesn't fit within this tiny sliver of sort of lunacy that Boko Haram.
But it is right. But there is violence.
There is violence.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, then there's the other question of what the United States should do about it. Some of the violence set inside the Boko Haram thing is this sort of peculiar and bloody struggle between predominantly Christian farmers and predominantly Muslim herders, and it's a battle partly about resources as well as religion. I say that to say, we're going to send the Marines in to police a dispute over who has the right to water in a particularly rural part of Nigeria? That seems an unwise thing to even contemplate. Perhaps there is some measure of sanctioning that could be done. I'm certainly not saying you should do nothing, but the idea that the US should sort of invade on behalf of Nigerian Christians doesn't seem a sensible thing to suggest.
Right. It doesn't seem particularly America first to me. I mean, unfortunately, in troubled parts of the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, in certain parts of Southeast Asia, there are struggles, there are violent clashes between ethnic groups, between religions. I don't think the U.S. is obligated to intervene. We don't want to be the world's policeman. That attitude has been very well repudiated. It's not because we should be indifferent to other people's suffering as Christians or just as moral people or as whatever. Certainly we're not, but we have to have a little bit of humility now about our ability to fundamentally alter the shape of conflict. We went in and we've gone in and killed tons of people and tried to rebuild countries and tried to foster democracy only to have it become less stable. Right. So we also don't want to put our troops in harm's way, again, for what? Yeah. Now, again, not to say nothing can be done. ISIS on some level has attacked Americans, and there's an authorization to kill terrorists to the extent we don't put our own people in harm's way. Mm-hmm. So that's fine to me. But I wouldn't just be sending in the troops willy-nilly per Trump's orders without Congress. Again, Congress should talk about these things. Right. Then we could hear arguments for or against. Wouldn't that be amazing if on the steps, on the actual floor, you had Ted Cruz could explain why he thinks this is a good idea, and maybe Rand Paul would explain why he doesn't think it's a good idea, and you could hear a debate on Denver. They could debate, they could discuss, and they could take a vote on it. Right. That is how it's supposed to work. Right. That is a good system. That is the system that our Constitution prescribes, and it's a good thing. Please do that.
Well,
instead of sitting behind closed door, briefings that we're not privy to, and most of the elected representatives and senators aren't privy to either.
Well, I agree, but I don't think Trump agrees. I mean, that's the fundamental problem. I mean, he and the people around him believe in this very expansive vision of the president's powers, the unitary executive, the idea that the president can just declare emergencies or simply not consult with Congress at all, as we see in the instance of Venezuela, for example, and the attacks on the vessels in the Caribbean, which, to be fair, Rand Paul and you have been very critical of. But, I mean, Trump just seems to think you can just do that. You can just go and kill people and, trust me, bro.
And this seems, frankly, even more of a stretch than the Venezuela situation because they're in our backyard, so to speak, and there's, to the extent the fentanyl's coming into the U.S. and it's a little bit in our neighborhood. Yeah. This is far flung from the U.S.
And an enormous, 220 million people in Nigeria. You're going to suddenly insert American troops in the middle of it. That seems unwise to me. Anyway, coming up, as Marjorie Taylor Greene continues to criticise her own party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a theory on what she calls the GOP Congresswoman's revenge tour. Right back after this.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is now responding to a viral video from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said that Greene was on a revenge tour.
Greene has been very vocal indeed in her criticism of the Republican Party as of late, and even appeared on The View this week. During an Instagram live stream recently, Ocasio-Cortez suggested she had some tea and knew the real reason for Greene's actions. Let's listen.
Here's some tea for you. Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to run for Senate in Georgia. Trump said no. And the White House and Trump land shut down Marjorie Taylor Greene's personal ambitions to run for Senate. And she has been on a revenge tour ever since.
Greene responded to that last night on our sister station News Nation. Here's what she had to say.
It sounds like she's best friends with Laura Loomer, too, because that's the same thing Laura Loomer said, but it's not true. I put out a lengthy post back this summer about why I didn't want to run for Senate, and I see the Senate is basically where all good things go to die. The other problem with AOC is I think she's really jealous that I came into her home state, stomped around, and actually had a great conversation with the ladies on The View.
Greene also said that reports indicating she was thinking of running for president in 2028 were baseless rumours. Well,
I think I'm going to take MTG's side on this one. Maybe Trump dissuaded her from running for Senate, but the stances MTG is taking aren't actually, she hasn't actually changed her mind on anything. She was very vocal about Epstein, and she continues to be vocal about Epstein. She was on foreign policy very America first, anti-intervention, and has maintained that stance with respect to Iran. She's been consistent on Israel, Gaza. Probably the one where you can say maybe she's moving her position a little bit is on healthcare and that, but given that's the only one, and mostly she's directing her frustration not at Trump, but at Speaker Johnson, who she's always had a combative relationship with, I don't think this is really about Trump, but I think AOC also just doesn't like MTG. There's some personal beef there, which is interesting because on a lot of things, on foreign policy, they've been aligned, but they seem to not like each other. Or at least AOC does not like MTG.
Yeah, I think there is some personal beef there. Years ago now, there was some sort of confrontation just off the House floor where MTG was, I think, going after AOC in some fashion, and it became a whole thing. And I agree, I don't think they like each other. And so it is one of those political feuds that seems to have real personal enmity at the heart of it. And look, I'm not privy to Marjorie Taylor Greene's personal thoughts. You'll be shocked to hear, Robby. But I do think that her willingness to criticise the Republican Party, I think that's the thing that has changed. And I do think the willingness to do it on things like healthcare or affordability or looking out for working people. I mean, I'm fine with her making that argument, of course. I think it's interesting that she does so. But I'm not really persuaded that the Marjorie Taylor Greene of 2 or 3 years ago would have made that argument in the same way. Now, I mean, as I say, whether that means she has some grievance that Trump didn't back her for a Senate race or not, I've literally no idea.
Right. If she has a grievance against Trump, she's not expressing it about Trump. She's not saying anything negative about Trump or saying that she's not on the team anymore. She listens to her constituents a lot, which is a good a tendency for an elected member of Congress. I wish more of them would do that. But
and I would not have thought she would become anywhere near as interesting a figure in American politics as she has become. I mean, I like many people of a more liberal disposition, was completely derisive of her when she first arrived with her, conspiracy theories and all the rest. But she has evolved into a genuinely interesting figure.
That's why you can't write off the people who are a little bit out there. You never know.
This is true. You never know where it goes from there.
AOC is, I think she's going to run for president while we're on the subject.
I have no question. I have no question in my mind. Just the way she's framing her arguments these days,
for sure,
has become very much appealing to a somewhat wider constituency and really trying to do that, trying to position herself for what I think is an almost inevitable presidential run at this stage.
That's going to be interesting to see.
Certainly
we have
is.
That to look forward to, don't we?
AOC versus Gavin Newsom, 2 of your favourites.
All right, that does it for us on Rising Live today. You can look out for more YouTube exclusive content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so that you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Tomorrow will be Niall and Amber, and then Niall will be back with me all next week. I'll see you then. Take care.